Where should you be located as a software engineer to grow your career at the fastest rate? That's what I want to cover in this video. The first thing I'll say is that location absolutely does matter and has a huge impact on who you work with, what kind of jobs you do, and ultimately how quickly your career grows. There are people who have been saying that because of COVID, where you work and what office you're in is irrelevant now. But that's simply not true. Historically, the Bay Area here in California has been the center of gravity when it comes to tech, if you want to operate in that constellation of big tech and startups. In 2023, I think that's still true for the most part, but we're going through an interesting transformation right now. When the COVID pandemic started, we had to be okay with being 100% remote because that was the only safe way to operate. And we had to make do with these collaboration tools of working remotely. And people thought that was a new normal. But what we're seeing now is the pendulum has swung back in the other direction. Companies want to open up again, but employees are resisting going back into the office. And you're seeing companies like Apple, Twitter, and Google demanding that employees come into the office at least a couple days a week. What we found from this worldwide experiment for the past few years is that where you work and how closely you work with the people around you matters a great deal to the productivity and impact you can have. That leads me to the biggest mistake I've seen software engineers make when it comes to working on a team, which is that they are remote while other people on the team are actually in person. And that will lead your career to suffer because you will naturally be excluded. The way to look at this is how much interaction are you having with people on the team? If I'm working with someone in person, I might go to lunch with them a couple times a week. I might pair program with them. I can have a lot more informal discussion. On the other hand, if you're remote or working from another office, I'll probably only see you for 2 or 3 hours a week in a small box on my Zoom screen or in my video chatting application. The result is that my depth of relationship and therefore my level of trust with the remote employee is going to be way less compared to this person who I spend way more time with informally in the office. And that can be a huge hindrance to your career growth because now if you don't have that trust, you don't have the good opportunity to find projects, you have fewer collaborators, and overall, you're going to be unhappier at work. This is why being a remote worker while the rest of your team is in person is a really bad idea. And this is very relevant for the next year as the whole tech industry goes through a transformation. Because in the past year or two, a lot of people have gone back to their hometown, wherever they came from, and they're not in these dense urban areas as much. And they're making a decision about whether they want to continue being remote or come back into the office. And I'll say that being 100% remote or 100% in person is okay. Those are really good ways to work. But hybrid teams are really hard to get right because naturally you're going to end up excluding people. And what that means for you as a software engineer is that you should be really deliberate about where you choose to work and what the dynamic of your team is. Now let's get to the question of where you should actually live as a software engineer. And obviously the answer will depend on a bunch of different factors, but I'll break it down into how to think about it if you're at a startup versus an established tech company. If you work at an established company, my advice in general is that you should go work at the headquarters. The most important projects, the most important people are all going to be located at the HQ. And so that's where you're going to have the most opportunity to work on interesting and impactful projects. If you work at Microsoft, the center of gravity for that company is very much in Seattle. And so I would recommend if you're trying to figure out where to live, try and pick the Seattle locations for Microsoft above any of the other offices in the country. The exception is if you can find an organization or a team where the center of gravity is truly not located in Seattle. So for example, at a company as large as Microsoft, they have to delegate some of the decision-making power, some of the important projects to different locations around the world. So for example, here in the Bay Area, there is a pretty large Microsoft office in Mountain View. I think they work primarily on Bing. And that would be a good reason to work in the Bay Area for Microsoft because you feel like the decision-making power for that organization is located here locally. That kind of thing can happen at a large company like Microsoft, Meta, or Google. But I would say that for most other companies, you're going to find that the remote offices, the remote locations, are going to end up being subservient to the HQ. And that could actually hurt your career because your projects could get canceled, the ownership could change, and other things outside of your control could really hurt you. Now let's talk about startups. And my strong opinion here is that the Bay Area is still the best place in the world to start a meaningful, high-growth tech company because the number of collaborators, the number of investors, the number of potential co-founders you could meet here is way higher in terms of density compared to other locations in the world. Other metro areas like Seattle and New York are also pretty good. I would rank them at like number 2 and 3. And so if you're already in one of those urban areas, I don't know if it's worth moving to the Bay just for that marginal improvement. But I would say that the general principle is that you want to have your startup be located and you want to join a startup located where you have a high density of people in your network who are in that area as well. Because those people are what will lead to your next opportunity to more learning, to more growth. What that means is that if you're in a rural area and you want to start a company, I would recommend you move to a tech hub and then start it. And if you're working as an employee at a fast moving startup, I really would recommend that you go to wherever the people in the startup are. Because at a startup, relative to a larger company, there's not going to be as much process. There won't be as much communication. And so being in person, being able to interact more deeply with the people in the company is going to pay a lot of dividends, even more than working at a big company. Startups are very much about getting lucky, finding that one investor, that one employee who can really change the trajectory of your company. And I feel like you have a really good way of manufacturing luck simply by moving to a really good tech hub. The last thing I want to mention is another mistake I frequently see software engineers make, which is being too short-term focused on the exact details of this specific job and not thinking about how this job will ladder up to or be a stepping stone for the next job. The reality of the tech industry and software engineers in particular is that we change jobs pretty frequently. So you should expect that after 2, 3, or 4 years, you will start looking for another job. And that's a really good argument for why you should try and locate yourself and find a job which has a good ecosystem of other startups or big companies around it. For example, if you get a job as an engineer at Walmart and they require you to go out to Arkansas, middle of nowhere, and there aren't too many other companies in that area, in my head, that's a really big negative for that opportunity. And you should instead try and find a job which will set you up well for other opportunities. So again, the Bay Area is amazing for that because you have the highest number of technical people, software engineers in the world located in this metro area. But the cost of living is quite high. And what you'll find is that there's often a homogeneity around the people here where everyone is working in tech. And for some people, that could be a really good thing. In fact, I would argue that if you're a young person trying to advance in your career quickly, that's a really good thing to be living in because everyone is thinking about tech and startups, which could be really good for your career. But I know that's a big turnoff for people who are a little bit later on and they don't want to be 100% invested in their career all the time. And so I would say an area like the Bay Area is good, Seattle, New York, Austin, LA. As long as you're going to a place where there's some density of technical people and people who are excited about advancing their career, I think you'll be set up for good opportunities in the future. One really good way to evaluate what kinds of companies are out there and how they operate is through the company I'm building called Taro, jointaro.com. And the idea is that we bring together really high quality engineers working at top tech companies, and you can see what kinds of questions and answers are they providing. And that gives you a really good insight into the processes, the problems, the good parts and bad parts about working at different companies like Meta, Amazon, Google, Apple, Airbnb. If your company has a learning budget, you can get the cost of Taro Premium completely reimbursed. So I'll leave a link for Taro in the description, jointaro.com. Would love to have you join. What other considerations do you have when it comes to evaluating a location for a software engineering position? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.